Good evening. My name is Dennis Stedman, and this is the Lower Makefield Township Ad Hoc Property Committee meeting of October 12th, 7:30 in the evening. We're going to talk about the Patterson Farm Master Plan. It's 7:30. We're starting on time. We have another committee member that may be joining us in midstream, but we have 5 committee members, and it's time to charge ahead. Welcome. I'm going to share my screen to help organize the discussion this evening. Bear with me as that comes up. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
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 This doesn't seem to be enlarging. There we go. Is that visible to all?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Very good. So the Patterson Farm Master Plan project has been a very busy and consuming one. Tonight is our October or our monthly meeting, and we'd like to get right into it. The agenda this evening that's been posted, call to order. I'll make some opening comments, and we'll have approval of the minutes. Then Joe Camarada, of a committee member and also the chair of Lower Makefield Historical Commission, will give us a report on the lessons that he's learned from the case studies associated with 501c3 management of these types of properties, comparables to Patterson Farm, if there is anything comparable to Patterson Farm. Well, then the committee is going to have a detailed discussion of potential recommendations to include into stage 1 of our master plan. Any master plan is a long-term, certainly a long-term vision and document requiring phases and stages. We have detailed cost estimates from our consultants on various elements that could be considered in stage 1. And the committee has developed a worksheet with those consultants to help us make some trade-offs of priorities and things of what might be considered in stage 1. We'll open the floor for other business from the committee, and then we'll have public comments followed by any kind of follow-ups and future scheduling. Beth, if I could, let's jump ahead and have you go ahead and get the minutes approved, and then I'll go to the slides if I could.
Sure. The minutes of September 14th meeting were distributed and to the committee members. Are there any changes? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
All those in favor?
All right.
Okay, thank you. Done.
Very good. Thank you, Bet. All of our meeting minutes are online following their official approval, and you can go back to I think it was June or July of 21 to begin begin our tracking our meeting minutes. If anyone is interested, our meetings are all held in public this way. Just in terms of putting the master plan for Patterson Farm into context, just a couple comments. It's certainly a very beautiful, historical, natural, agricultural site that is unique in many ways, and one of the ways in particular it's unique is it's owned by Lower Makefield Township. We know there are shrinking and fewer number of farms in Lower Makefield Township, and that causes justifiable angst in the community. But they're private farms that's very difficult to ultimately protect and prevent development on. This one is owned by the township, so it puts it in a very unique situation, and and so the Board of Supervisors have charged the committee with this. Both the community at large, we've seen through multiple public comments, meetings, input, and the Lower Makefield Township itself is dissatisfied with the status of Patterson Farm. That's kind of the bottom line. You don't launch a project to look at new directions if something is humming along and working well. You do that when there's something amiss. They're dissatisfied with the conditions of the buildings. Most of the buildings, minus two, are closed off and boarded up because largely because they are unsafe and unusable condition. They're unsatisfied with the public access to the grounds and the buildings because there isn't any. It is publicly owned land. There are constraints associated with agricultural operations, etc. But nevertheless, very disappointed in the community is disappointed in the amount of access that they have to this township-owned property, and a dissatisfaction with the overall management of this historical property. The fact that it hasn't always been kept it's not kept in good condition. There's controversy over uses and changes, and if there's a new tenant or some rent decisions. So the overall management has also been unsatisfactory, I think, in this history. And this is what leads to the request to develop a new master plan. In working on this project for the last year intensely, there are very clear planning priorities and guiding principles that the committee has adopted, has used, has agreed upon. Number one, Patterson Farm must remain in agriculture. That's a top priority. The majority of the land, not all, but the majority of the land is in an agricultural easement, and so that is its only use. There isn't an alternative use, if you will. But it's important without that easement that it stays in agriculture. To the community and to the historical benefit of the community. The historical buildings and the farm vistas are to be preserved. That is clear. The community input, there's no angst about that. There is an interest in maintaining and saving these historic Quaker farmsteads. Some buildings obviously are more important than others. There's some at block 1950s farm garages that are you can't say are as historically important as the much older houses, but by and large the farm vista and historical buildings need to be preserved. That's a key priority. And third, as we've said over and over again, without a use, buildings die and can't be maintained. And that's why they're dying, and that's why they're not maintained, because they don't have a use today. So productive uses, reuses are necessary to be identified, and the uses must generate value to justify the community investment of both time and money. And by value, we mean in some cases hard value, dollar revenue to help support real monetary cost of maintenance, and in other cases softer community value that the community appreciates and places value in some non-monetary recreation and enjoyment that helps the community be willing to support this. So those are the clear planning priorities and guidelines, and those have not wavered really since the beginning. With agriculture being the most important priority, the Patterson Farm produces more food and farm products today than at any other time in its 300 plus, about 340 years of continuous agriculture. It's very rich soil, of course, but it is very productive. It is a very productive agricultural site today. It currently produces over 14 different food products, ranging from cantaloupe, zucchini, tomatoes, sweet corn, on and on, to also livestock, field corn, and soybeans. And that is important because it's locally grown, locally produced produce that is sold and by and large consumed in the greater Lower Makefield Township community, and that has real value. It is that bountiful and ongoing and successful while not using the existing buildings at all. The buildings are outdated from an agricultural use. It's clear, not debatable. So they need to find another use. It's been very productive without those. It is productive because they're using modern and responsible agricultural practices by a highly skilled farmer operator, and they have made major investments in equipment, facilities, agricultural inputs to keep the produce and going. And so we applaud that kind of and are fortunate in Lower Makefield to have that kind of agricultural operation. So farming without these buildings has not been the problem that led to the questions and dilemmas around Patterson Farm. We just need the farming is there. We just need to assure that it continues. So we have to develop a plan that must and will support continuous farming of the property. The 15 old historic buildings are what present the challenge, and to be saved, they must be used, and meaning they must be A, repaired, that takes dollars, B, maintained, that takes dollars, and C, carefully managed. And that's a dilemma on the best way to manage it, and that's something we're going to talk to this evening. So the master plan needs to find productive community-supported uses for these buildings that are compatible with farming and with the historical nature and of this natural public land. Community support, that means community access, community use, and you get community appreciation. Productive uses means it generates revenue to help support maintenance and generate some of that soft community value I talked about. And it has to be compatible uses. That is, that respects the historical character of the site. It respects the natural setting of the site. It retains the scenic farm vistas that the gateway of Lower Makefield Township. As you come off the highways, you see that farm, those farmsteads. That's an important signature for our community. And compatible means recreational access, public use, but without huge waves of cars and people. We've heard that over and over. It's not, you're not talking about music concerts and giant wedding venues, right? It's public use, but a respectful use at the right kind of volumes. So LMT tasked this volunteer committee to work with hired professionals, architects, engineers, landscape architects, etc., to develop an insightful, executable plan for this site. We were charged with IDing long-term goals and solutions so that the near-term decisions could be made consistent with those goals and long-term solutions. Patterson Farm needs solutions. If we're going to start making decisions and start down a new path, we have to know where that path is heading. It's got to be consistent with those long-term goals. So thanks to the support of the township, there's been professional objective analysis done of each building, the conditions, the feasible uses, the designs, the cost estimates of what it would take to repair them. We've also had professional objective market analysis done of best compatible uses for this site and these types of buildings. Those were found to be arts in general, arts and agriculture, nature, always are compatible. Potential tradesmen, talking about blacksmiths, different journeymen that may want to set up a shop there in a building. in crafts, education, and recreation. That's the bottom line. It's certainly not a retail destination kind of place. So those in the most summary sense, are what was found as objective market-based analysis. We have professional objective site plans looking at the site dispassionately in an organized way. Compatibility with farming and the historical site and the envisioned uses can be done with a modest amount of reorganization and re-tailoring of the site to help the flows. And this plan is, as I said before, multi-staged, multi-year process in order to realize a vision. And so in order to do that, we need to start with defined what we're calling stage one priorities. And stage one is envisioned as defined as what can be achieved in 1 to 3 years. It's not next quarter, it's not next year. It's a process that will take time. Stage one is 1 to 3 years. And to go too deep into the other stages can be a little bit of fool's gold because all those other stages will be dependent upon the successes and the execution of stage one. So if stage one is successful, we can see where stage two leads. We may learn things in stage one that can't be done or haven't been done. That would impact then the ultimate stage two at that time. The vision that the committee has developed and offered multiple times is Patterson. Excuse me, I'll just read it since it's live video. The Patterson Farm is 234 acres of land that stands out from the surrounding highways and suburbs because of its unique and beautiful features. It's like an oasis with farm fields, trees, ponds, and wildlife. The farm is also home to 2 historic Pennsylvania Quaker farmsteads, which are important to our past and to our community today. People use and appreciate this special place for growing food, creating art, finding inspiration, and providing education. The land is incredibly fertile soil that has been farmed for over 300 years without interruption. If that vision can be achieved, if we can create that in reality at the site, that's a success for our community, for our township, and would be something really distinguishing Lower Makefield, without a doubt. So one of the questions we asked is, how do we manage this site? Consistently, we have had 2 strong, confident recommendations from all the professionals. And these are professionals on the governmental side, and they are as well as the consulting, architectural side. Municipal governments are not organized nor structured to manage such properties. It's a well-known fact. It's not particular to LMT. It's known around the country. That's not what municipalities are set up to do, and they're not going to do it well. That's come across loud and clear. Number 2, a dedicated, focused nonprofit that can raise funds, that can request grant, submit grant applications, use community volunteers, that has a transparent and open relationship with the landlord, can manage such sites and do so today all across the country. That is the primary model of success, it seems. So our stage 1 recommendations, while we don't have all of them yet, and we're going to turn to that as an agenda item following this one, it will include that element that we're going to recommend that this property, management of this property, be turned over to a responsible nonprofit with a transparent and trusted relationship with LMT, the property owner. And in order to help get our arms around this subject matter and understand what that involves, it's easy to say, but how is that done? Joe Camarada on our committee has worked hard and devoted a lot of time to look into this particular dimensions. And so that is our next agenda item. Joe, if you could share with us some of the lessons from your case studies that you've looked at on these nonprofit 501c3 management of these properties. And with
thank you, Dennis.
I thank everyone. Would you want to share your screen, Joe?
My screen, yes. Okay. Yeah.
Let me stop this. And it's available to you.
Everyone can see this now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay. Slideshow. Go back. Okay. So what I'd like to do this evening is share with you the sites that were selected and that I spoke to. Go through the key learnings from those sites. And then I'd like to end on another topic, which has to do with the National Register submission and a recommendation for how to go forward. And I'll be looking for a motion for approval for that, okay? So first of all, let me start with the selected sites. And you see them listed here on the screen. Langhorne Heritage Farm is in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Dudley Farm was one of the farms that Doug pointed out to us in the master plan, and as well as Doug recommended Thunderbird Lodge down in Rose Valley. Sanborn Mills Farm, I had visited that back in June, and what I put into the report was simply just the email that I had sent to the committee back in June. So it's just kind of verbatim. I put it there because a lot of the learnings from that pertain to this, and I just didn't want it to get lost. There's one other property or one other site to look at it, and this was recommended by Donna Doan from Patterson Farm Preservation. That's the Burlington County Agriculture Center. And what's interesting about it is it's both owned by the county, also appears to be managed by the county, where the other ones are not. I've reached out to them to try to get to speak to someone, but I haven't heard back yet. So we'll have to circle back with them. Before I go forward, just wanted to point out something about Thunderbird Lodge. And I have it listed here as both nonprofit and borough. And that's because there's something called a reverter clause. And we're going to talk a little bit more about reverter clauses later. But essentially, the lodge came into the possession of the borough. The borough did not want to manage it, as Dennis said previously. It didn't really feel it would be good at that. So it handed it off to a newly formed nonprofit. But in that agreement with the nonprofit, the nonprofit owns it. In that agreement with the nonprofit, it says if the nonprofit should fail, then the property reverts back to the borough. So the nonprofit can sell it; they have to use it as prescribed. But if they financially can't cut it, then the property reverts back to the borough. And we'll talk a little bit more about reverter clauses when I talk about my conversations with PHMC. The other thing, but on that point, there's an action item I think we need to bring in that maybe we can note this and come back to it at the end so you can help me. I think we need to understand a little bit better the advantages and disadvantages of the township owning the property, the township leasing the property, and the township transferring ownership with a reverter clause to the nonprofit. And what I mean by that, it might impact the ability to access grants. There might be certain grants that are accessible to one form of ownership and not to the others. It also may impact how work gets done. So for example, at Rose Valley, when I asked about that, because it's owned by a nonprofit, they don't need to bid. Where if it was owned by the borough, they would need to bid projects that were above 20,000, for example. Okay, so I think we need to understand that. I'm not an expert in it, so maybe we can find someone who could help me, and then do a little bit more thinking around which type of ownership model might be the best going forward. The other thing I want to say about the sites before we jump into the key learnings is it's hard to assess by just looking at or just listening to people's words, but in many ways, these sites, Langhorne Heritage Farm and Dudley Farm and Sanborn definitely were in worse shape than Patterson Farm. Sanborn, I was there, I saw the pictures, and the buildings were in far worse shape than the buildings in Patterson Farm. And if you read through the report, I included some of the verbatim comments from the people at the farm. Like the woman I spoke to at Dudley Farm said they thought the fire department was going to use them and burn them down so they could show people how to put out fires. That's how bad a shape they were in. So in many respects, because they're owned by the township and because the township did some sort of maintenance, primarily keeping the water out of the buildings, while there's a lot of work to be done, they're probably not in as bad a starting conditions as what some of these other properties were when they started. Okay. Let's go through some of the key learnings. And the first one I just wrote is that there's really no silver bullet when it comes to preservation funding. A lot of us that have been in the business world, you kind of look for the 80-20 rule. Like, what's the one thing that's going to give you the biggest impact, right? And I wish that were so easy to do in preservation, but it's simply not, right? If you talk to these nonprofits, they really have a menu of things that they are doing in order to preserve the buildings. And they are using memberships, and they're using donations, they're using grants, they're using, in some cases, support from the townships in order to do that. But it really is a matter of, having a management organization that doesn't do one thing well, but actually can do multiple things well in order to raise the necessary funds and resources. I keep saying funds, but I'm going to talk about the importance of volunteers later. The other thing, and the second thing is really the importance around public engagement and involvement in the sites. And this was something that never really occurred to me about why it was important, but it was clear from the conversation there was two reasons that stuck out. Simply, one is the revenue that you get from memberships and donations provide matching funds for grants. For example, the Keystone Preservation Fund grants are a 50-50 match. So if you get $100,000 from the state, you have to raise $100,000 on your own. And the public engagement, memberships, and things like that go towards those types of matches. But the other thing that the directors that I spoke to brought out is it's really important to be able to demonstrate the public interest and engagement. And I'll give you just a quick story. The Historical Commission, we applied for a preservation grant to do some work over at Slate Hill Cemetery on Yardley Makefield Road. And we didn't get the grant. And one of the things that we got dinged on was we couldn't demonstrate any public participation or engagement with the cemetery. People walk through it all the time, right? But we don't have any way of counting that. We don't have any way of measuring it. So what these people talked about was when you think about public engagement, you have to think about events and other ways to demonstrate how many people come and how many people engage, because that is a multiplier effect when you start talking to people that are granting agencies. They want to see that public interest in order to do that. So I think that's very important. And I hope that we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about our stage 1 priorities. The third learning was how these historic farms, so 3 of them were farms. Thunderbird Lodge is a little bit different, but 3 of them were farms, but how they leveraged their farmhouse to generate revenue. And they did it in multiple ways. All 3 of them had first of all, the nonprofits all had a office in the farmhouse. That was kind of the very first thing. But all 3 of them also had some sort of residence in the farmhouse that generated revenue. It could have been in the case of, and actually this is also applied to Rose Hill. They also have a residence there. It could be people that are just renting and they're paying a monthly rent. In the case of 2 of them, they were called caretakers, and they were actually doing more than just renting. They were doing some light maintenance, if you would, around the property, mowing lawns, shoveling snow. In the case of Langhorne, for example, they rent the space out. They have rooms there that they rent out, and cleaning of those rooms was part of the caretaker job. So each of them had a resident, and the resident did some of that. They also had the rental of private rooms. And as Dennis said before, we're not looking at large, massive events with lots of cars. But, these were people that were renting a room in the farmhouse for a birthday party or an anniversary party or a shower, or in some cases, actually a business meeting. Someone talked about, since everyone's going to work from home, they're looking at, interesting places where they can hold their meetings with their employees that isn't your local hotel, right? So, and that was a very, I want to say lucrative area, but it was a good area for them to generate some revenue. So the farmhouse was usually their first focus of preservation, right? They got it up, they got the residents and they got their office, they got the residents, and they were able to get some rooms in to generate revenue or do house tours and things like that. So they stressed that was exactly where they started with this. So beyond the farmhouse, they focused on the rest of the buildings in terms of educational program and curating exhibits. Langhorne is not overly big. It's probably maybe one of the two farmsteads, but Dudley Farm and Sanborn Farm, I mean, they have, I think Sanborn probably has more buildings than Patterson Farm. Dudley, I put a site plan into the report, and you can count the number of buildings, but it's on the order. So, I mean, these, again, from a scale perspective, what we're talking about is, is farms and buildings that are representative to the challenge that face us. So they actually began to use these other buildings for educational programs, curating exhibits. Someone reminded me that, hey, we are first and foremost a museum, and that opens up a whole new set of grants that if you were not a museum, you would not be able to get to. They also, either when they gave these kind of workshops and these programs, sometimes it would be staff from the nonprofit that would do it. But a lot of times they would actually bring in artisans and just rent that out. So they may have someone come in and doing a blacksmith workshop, for example. And it might be someone who was interested in selling what they were creating, and they paid for a rental. They came in and they held a workshop at the farm, and hopefully made some sales as part of that. So that educational piece became very important, but it also became another source of revenue for them because they were often able to rent the outbuildings out to artisans who wanted to use them. Farmers market, community gardens, and on-site events also really encouraged public engagement, but they said that was really more publicity than it was, things that brought that very minimal revenue. But again, it was all about getting the public to engage with the site, and they found multiple ways of doing that. For a lot of them, and Rose Hill's a little bit different here, right? But volunteers were the key source of expertise and skills. They brought key expertise and skills for managing the nonprofit, but they also did a lot of the work through sweat equity. There, in the case of Dudley Farm, for example, they were given one of the two barns is called Munger Barn, and they were actually given the barn. It wasn't on the property. Someone else had just kind of deconstructed the barn and said to Dudley, "Do you want it?" And he said, "Yes." And in order to do that, they had to move it. They had to get people to reconstruct it, and they had to get more materials, nails and braces and things like that as they reconstructed the barn. And it was all done by volunteer efforts. They had a person on their board who was actually working in construction. He was able to go to his suppliers and get all the wood and nails and braces and everything they needed to build it. Another person on the board actually was a teacher at a local trade school, and he actually brought the staff. He actually brought the volunteers, the people in order to reconstruct the barn. So they stressed over and over that, while it's important to get grants, it's equally, if not more important, in order to bring in volunteers to help with the work. Otherwise, it becomes, as we're seeing, prohibitively expensive, or it'll just take way too long. I mean, if you have to, for a nonprofit to raise the types of millions of dollars that it would take way too long, and you can shorten that by the use of volunteers. Which brought us to the next point is, it was very important in terms of how you select your board as a nonprofit. And it wasn't a matter of just having people who were friends of yours, but it was actually people who can contribute. And they talked about people on their boards contributed, first and foremost through fundraising, in some cases fundraising directly. In the case of Rose Valley, they had one person who was donated 20,000 or over 20,000 from their own pocket, but just going out and bringing a network in order to do that fundraising. They have professionals on their board who will do their accounting for them, or even take care of some of their legal issues. And again, they have a number of people on the board who will go out and get resources that are needed in order to help to maintain and preserve it. So they talked about, having productive members, it's really important for building the board. I asked a lot about what types of expertise that are needed in there, and they said where possible, you want to have a staff person who is experienced in farm or historic site management and/or program development. They said it's I mean, these are people who are educated in these areas. The one person I spoke to from Dudley Farm, she's a dietitian, and she said it just took her years to learn what people who went to school already came in to know. So they said as much as possible, be able to build up that be able to have a person there who can begin to do that is going to make your efforts much more productive, especially on the program development side. And then the last thing to speak about is PHMC. So the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission, PHMC, and they have experience with managing or having nonprofits manage properties.
Joe, I hate to interrupt. My apologies. Excuse me. I have a bit of a crisis here. My wife's car broke down. I need to leave and go rescue her in distress. What I'd like to ask when you're done, the next agenda item is to look at the stage 1 cost estimates, etc. And I'd like to ask Jennifer to share screen with the Excel spreadsheet and kind of walk through and show what those proposals are. There's 36 potential elements we considered for stage 1, and we've asked each member to select what they would support, and that's all in this worksheet. And then for the that's really the last agenda item before the public comment period. And then to Fred Childs is the vice chair. He is not here. Ron, could I ask you then to chair the meeting in my absence after Jennifer handles the stage 1 part, and after Joe is done with this item?
I'll certainly.
I hate to put you on the spot, and
Sure.
I can only apologize, but I need to depart. Thank you all.
Good luck, Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis. I hope she's safe.
Good luck. Hope
Thank
she's all
you.
right.
Take care.
And the last point on PHMC was just that they have a lot of experience with this. They have a number of sites which are either administered or managed by volunteers, and they have some really good advice that I put in there around how to select a nonprofit that is likely to be successful with preserving the grounds, as well as they have contracts. In fact, the person I spoke to sent me about 4 or 5 different contracts today that have things like covenants and reverter clauses and things like that we could look at. So it was a really valuable resource, and I'm sure one that we'll probably be going back to and talk to more. They were the overall key learnings. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on those.
Now, Joe?
Yeah, now, Steve.
I guess I just wondered if people were aware that Lower Makefield Township does have some experience with the tenant-worker relationship. they had, of course, everybody's aware of.
I'm getting some other noise over your voice. Do you have on a radio or something in the background?
My wife does. Okay, I've got to turn off.
Thank you.
All right, sorry. Okay, Lower Makefield has some experience with the tenant worker relationship, and it's 5 Mile Woods. At this point, I'm not sure who is actually renting the old residence that's on the property at 5 Mile Woods, but it used to be the ranger who provided service not only at 5 Mile Woods, but the rest of the township. Mellon, who previously, as this was 20 years ago, had his family there as well. So I'm not sure who has all the background information about that, but there should be some records, etc., of how that was handled for reference, at least to compare it.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think they're actually still renting it as far as I understand, but that's, yeah, we could have, there's some legal agreements there that we could also look at. In the report itself, I actually went on to the site and tried to look at the past 3 years, the financials of some of these, and I would encourage you to read through that because, you know, they're not making millions of dollars. They put it that way. They're not even making hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But they're still able to you know, bring the resources that are needed to preserve the buildings. I would say the one that was most was Rose Valley. They actually got $300,000 in state grants, which is actually pretty damn good. You know, and they did not use volunteers as much. They actually hired theirs, but of course, most of their work was dealing with slate roofs and stucco and masonry, which is a little bit different than dealing with wood, you know, so there's a little more skill they needed. But again, look at the financials that are there for the others in terms of their revenue and things like that. And you'll see there's some doable numbers, I think, from that. If there's no other questions or comments, I'd like to move on to one other topic. Okay.
Sure, go ahead, Joe.
All right. And I don't know whether, Beth, do we still have a quorum?
That you muted.
Did Jim Scott join? I don't see him. And a good point, Joe, because
You can
we
still
have 4. We have 4 out of 7, so yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can still hold a meeting even if you didn't.
Yeah,
just
but I'm asking for a
decided to come.
motion, Susan. That's why I
Yeah,
asked
yeah.
you.
No, so you have 4. You're good.
All right. So it was as part of what was in the master plan coming from Siler Drury was to look at National Register submission for Patterson Farm. And there's a couple of things that need to be done. First of all, there's this determination of eligibility. It was made years ago. It was made back, I think, in 1998 when I-95 ramp was rebuilt. I think they actually determined then that it was eligible, but it needs to be updated every 5 years. And I've talked to the PA SHPO about that. They want to see some recent photographs. We have those from Doug, and they want to see a historical significance statement, and we have that also. So I'd like to update the determination of eligibility to make it current. And then the other thing is I'd like to, you know, explore with the SHPO what are possible ways of bringing the farm onto the National Register. And I listed 3 here. I mean, you can list the farmstead separately. You can actually put Patterson Farm in as its own historic district, or as we've discussed a number of times, you can expand the Edgewood Village Historic District, which would probably be the easiest thing to do. But I just want to understand a little bit, are there benefits or drawbacks to each of these approaches? So I've talked to David Kratzner, and if I could get a motion from the ad hoc committee, then I would approach the Board of Supervisors with that motion in order to approve going forward with these steps.
Is there a motion to do that? Do I hear a motion?
I motion.
Thank you, John. Is it seconded? Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Point of order. I have a discussion, I have a question. Is
Good.
this going to involve appropriations, or is this going to be done by the historical commission or volunteers?
It's gonna be done by the historical commission, so it's
I
not
see.
gonna involve any appropriations at this point. We'll come back then with a strategy of what's the right option to get the farm onto the National Register, and what's the gap between the information we have and the information we need.
Again, so then all those in favor? Looks to me like if I can see everybody, you have.
Like the floor voted yes.
Or vote
Yes.
yes.
You're good to go, Joe.
All right, thank you. That's it for me, Ron.
Thank you, Joe. I think Dennis wanted you, Jennifer, to lead us in this part of the discussion, which is to look at some of the numbers and some of the options that people have advanced.
Yes, so I'm going to share my screen.
I should probably preface that I'm looking at actually Dennis's email he sent out today. And what he basically said is it includes all the revisions and votes by 6 of the 8 members here. And it's not our final stage 1 recommendations, but he wanted us, I guess, to talk about this amongst ourselves. We're not making a final recommendation tonight. We're talking about it. And then at a later date, we're going to reconvene to come up with final recommendations to take to the Board of Supervisors, okay? That's how we'll proceed.
Right, thank you. So what the committee has done with the help of the professional team is list 36 tasks, basically scopes of work, divided them up by parcel and building, and then rate them with whether or not they should be something that gets attempted to be done in this first phase of work, which we're calling year 1 through year 3. We do have an estimated cost for each line item as well, and that does take into consideration some of the thought process that the committee went through when they were evaluating what is absolutely necessary to be done versus what could be pushed off a little bit. Potentially, we could look for grant money to fund that piece. So, I mean, there are a lot of elements here, but this was a really good attempt at organizing what could appear to be a puzzle that you can't find the corner piece. So to start, we have line item 1, for example. These are all items in this first piece that are common to the site. So the first one is LMT turns over property management to a nonprofit group, and that's where all of the information that Joe has been gathering comes into play. Right now, we have an estimated cost of $10,000, and in the comments section, you can see we're talking about legal costs, and this is just a placeholder. The second item was update or revise the zoning classification to the site. We have a placeholder for that of $5,000. We only had one person on the committee think that was something we should do in this very first phase. But we can always, we can revisit that once we ask and discuss, why do you think that this is important at this juncture? Item 3 is a new farm or driveway access. And this includes a design and the construction, and we have an estimate of $80,000 to do that. So this will be available for everybody to see, so you can really dive into the scopes of work. The next section here is common site, is the Patterson farmstead itself. So it goes through every individual building, and these are items that pertain to immediate work needed to, let's say, halt water infiltration. If we can halt water infiltration, it means we can hold the building steady while we do some more serious planning and talk about putting more dollars into that structure. Let's see if we have one here where it's, we have a paint the Patterson Farm, all the Patterson Farmstead buildings, and that's line 12. We have an estimate of that for $185,000. We think that may be high, but we would do a priority subset. The reason why a lot of people pick this one is because it's such an immediate impact to the care of the site. Anybody driving by would immediately see that something's been done. Tree cleanup, line 20. This is an interesting one because it's initial landscaping, tree trimming, and cleanup. Of course, that's going to make the site look better. There's a discussion here about who would do that. Is it $10,000 to a vendor? Is it partially completed by in-house labor, and we could reduce this out-of-pocket cost? So these are the kinds of things that once we determine what we all agree is for the first phase of effort, how are we going to approach it as far as cost and labor? Here's one that's long range. Line 22, connect water and sewer to the Janie and caretakers from the Patterson Central location. And this one actually has a predecessor, which is run water and sewer from Satherway to Central Patterson. So that's line 21. So some of these, you can see they have dependencies, and that's also a consideration when you talk about what are we going to do and in what order. If we bump down to the Patterson Farmstead, you can see that we've got similar types of activities. We've got painting, that's line 25. We have cleaning debris from around the house, that's line 26. We have abatement, line 27. And then we have some repeat, you'll see here on line 31, run water and sewer laterals. So it runs the gamut of things that are definitely will be done at some point in time, but perhaps not in this very first phase of effort. I would open it up to the committee now because we do have a lot of common choices here. You can see a lot of people pick the same things, but then we do have some outliers, and I think it'd be healthy to have a little dialogue.
Yeah, can I suggest, Jennifer, I'm trying to think of a good way for us to proceed here so that we can do this efficiently. And as I'm looking at the votes, perhaps, Jennifer, what we could do is if it's got 4 to 6 votes, seems to me there's a lot of consensus around that. Perhaps we could talk about the outliers where there's 1, 2, and 3s. Would that be an acceptable way to proceed, or would you prefer to go a different way to talk about?
No, I think that's a great way to do it, and I kind of almost started to do that very up at the top when we talked about line item 2.
So
the rezoning.
One of the other things I was thinking about when Dennis sent his email this evening about this was, I'd be interested to understand what people's objectives were for making their selection. Like, so for example, my objective was get public engagement with the site, water abatement on the building, and clean up anything that would prohibit volunteers from working. So any of the asbestos or lead or things like that. So that's what what I tried to do was pick things that were consistent with that. I would be interested to hear what others had as objectives when they were making their selections.
Anybody want to comment?
Sure. Unfortunately, I did not get mine into Dennis in time. But when I ran through my list, I went through and I thought, what was the best use of money at this juncture? Like for the zoning, I did not and would not have chosen that one because we don't know what would be rezoning it to. So at that point, until there's a definition of what would be rezoning it to, I don't think that $5,000 would be a useful expenditure. So that's how I mean, how useful is it to keep this process moving in the short term so we can get a better plan for stage 2, and then we can spend the money in an appropriate manner.
Other comments? I'll give you my thinking, Joe. When I went through it, I felt like the major priority was to set up the 501c3 and get that up and running, because a lot of the responsibility then for the future of the plan will reside with them. And then when I went down the list, I tried to choose those things that would keep the buildings up in a minimal way, minimal expenditure for the first 1 to 3 years, and fix some of the holes, etc., painting. That was kind of my approach, because what I was thinking was that ultimately the 501c3 will be responsible for evaluating the overall plan and then getting our input here, as well as seeking either grants, contracts, perhaps deep pocket money from the community, and other ways to help fund the longer term projects that need to get done. Other comments?
I agree with Ron. I wanted to make sure that the buildings were shored up. So foundations and groundhog holes and those kinds of things. So other than that, yes, you have to get a 501c3 in there and take a look at things. So it's up to us to, I guess, I'm confused. So we're not making recommendations tonight.
Well, that was what when I looked at Dennis's email that he sent out, that he said that we were not coming to final recommendations this evening. In other words, the way I read that is we're not finalizing, we're not taking a vote tonight as a committee. That's how I read his email. We were discussing it tonight, and then at a later date, after this discussion, we would finalize the recommendations before going to the BOS.
So we're not going to make recommendations until November?
As I recall, he's going before the Board of Supervisors on 1 November. So I would guess, this would be my guess, that we would meet as soon as possible after this meeting to finalize our recommendations, taking into account the discussion that's going on here tonight.
Okay, so the 11/1 date is still there and we have to schedule another meeting.
Yes, that's correct.
I see. Okay.
Yes.
I'm with you.
And
Anyway,
my
so
guess is
that was
the
my
next
thinking,
week.
Joe, and everybody, was to, again, shore up the groundhog holes, do the painting, like Jennifer said, it's the most visible thing, clean up the site in general, and have some visible results to the public.
So it sounds like we all had similar goals, what we're trying to achieve. So then maybe, as Ron was saying earlier, we should look at where those differences were to understand why.
Okay, so if we go to the far right, there's your votes column, and it's very easy to see which items were either a one or two people supporting that effort. I think we've already discussed pretty thoroughly the rezoning classification. The next one that got just one vote was line 8, design and construct pedestrian crosswalk at Mirror Lake Road.
Yeah, and that was just a public access for me. When I think about, we're putting trails and things on there, but people need to be able to get safely across the road in order to use them. So to me, it was just part of public engagement.
I don't, to me, until the trails are built, we don't want the crosswalk built. I mean, when at the same time the trail is built, you can do the crosswalk at the same time, is my thought. But
number 6 is the money for the trails.
It's the design of the trails.
It's the design of the trails. It's not the build of the trails.
Okay. Item 10, the National Registry as its own district. I think that the National Registry stuff, until you get your discussion, Joe, with the supervisors, I'm not sure if anybody is really pushing for that. Unfortunately, Fred's not here.
Yeah, I think the conversation with the PA SHPO is going to be really important, because it might be close. I mean, they might say, look, the information you have is sufficient. So just go ahead and write the submission, Right.
The next two that got just a single vote line 14 and line 15. Let's see. Bet you are in favor of the equipment garage, basic structural repairs.
Again, that's the groundhogs. It's redded.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go back to number 13, which only got 3 votes. So we're kind of split on that one. Again, the groundhog holes and the thing that the note there is that it's sound enough to postpone. Was that the recommendation in detail from the consultants from Doug?
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I think some of the stuff is to parse out groundhog hole repair versus is there structural work that can't wait 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's the groundhogs, but if the foundation, he said the north end of the foundation was of concern, I think, last meeting, and also gutters and downspouts. Again, that's water getting in.
Right.
There are broken boards on that building that just need to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe not the whole structural repairs, but something. My observation is that there should be something done to help.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that this is a good roadmap to take back to Doug and say, obviously, we're interested in some of the scope, but what is the bare minimum to achieve our goal? Can we reduce the cost because we're actually taking a teeny bit of scope away? Yeah.
That's a good point, Jennifer. That's a very good point. Yes.
Right. Right.
And I
Item
think
22.
part of this exercise, don't you think? I mean, part of this exercise is to look at some of these outliers, get people's reactions to it, and then go back to Doug with some of this so we can perhaps refine it before we meet again to come up with final recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Jennifer, on 14 on the lower shed roof, again, to me, that was a water abatement issue. Now, Doug may say it's not, it's just the shingles, but usually when roofs start to fail, water starts to get in, and that's why I selected that.
Right, right. So that's a good question to bring up to Doug. I see that the line 22 that you looks like you are in favor of it, but you have to know it requires line 21 to be done as well. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, those buildings won't be ready for water hookups till later. So you can take that out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not going to do it now, but what
I know, but
but I think that this is a good thing to look at. The next one with the low vote count is line 28. It's all Satterthwaite, excluding the corn crib paint and minimum necessary carpentry for painting.
Now, Joe, you weighed in on that one.
Yeah.
You
Right.
thought this was...
We had said earlier, I mean, just painting again helps a lot to preserve the buildings, as well as it just makes it look nicer. As Dennis said earlier, I think it was Dennis who said earlier, it shows that there's some care being taken. It shows progress.
Yeah, the previous 3 items, 25, 26, 25 and 26 and 27 add up to 115 too. So I don't know whether that's a redundancy or it includes the barn being painted, I guess.
No, I think one is just a Satterthwaite house, and then the rest is the Satterthwaite properties.
All of the properties. So in addition to Satterthwaite.
Yeah, so it'll be an extra 115.
Oh, okay.
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
But following on to Beth's comments, I would say 26 and 27 are higher priority because once you resolve those issues, you can have volunteers do painting. Painting is not a high skill. So you can have volunteers come in, scrape some of those buildings, especially the ones that are 1 story or just 1 or 2 stories, maybe not the houses in the barn, right? Because they're pretty tall, but, so again, that would be a way to offset some of these costs, but we have to, be able to have volunteers come in. We can't have asbestos and biological waste and things like that hanging around.
Mhm.
Any comments on that?
I think you also have to do number 29 along with the ones 26, 27.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else they'd like to highlight from this first pass?
I would really like to see the corn crib demolished on the Satterthwaite side. As Joe said, if you're going to have volunteers on the property, it would be nice to make it safe. So people poking their nose in there will not be injured.
And maybe we could, reduce the 5,000. We can find somebody that could, would take it down and keep the wood as a reclaimed wood item. One that would, reuse the wood, which is great. And two, it would reduce the costs. And make sure that, it looks nicer.
Yeah.
If it would help, if the township cleans up the residual waste from that building, I'll take it down.
Is that Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Other comments on this? None? No more? Well, what's interesting is, we go from a low of just about 500, which was Dennis's recommendations, to a high of about 763. Joe, that was yours. So, we're somewhere between 500 and 750 for the sake of discussion here tonight. That's what we ultimately be recommending. We need to work with some of this now and refine it and then vote on it and then take it to the Board of Supervisors. But that's a good starting place in terms of our recommendations for stage one. Any comments on that? I mean, because that's the broad question here, is what we take forward. And that seems to be the spread here.
I think as I think Ben and Jennifer were pointing out earlier, there's some packaging here that may not be optimal for us. And if we were go back to Doug and say, look, our main concern is that the buildings are, we keep water out of the buildings and we, make sure the cleanups there is safe for volunteers and all to come on, we might get a different packaging of some of these things that would bring that cost down.
Also, since they're broken out in packages, Satterthwaite is one, Patterson another, you can bundle the painter, for example.
Right.
And painting the whole everything, and then that he may be able to come in at a lower price, something like that too.
Any other comments on this?
Yes, Sam Stewart, the farmer, has a painter that travels up and down the coast, and all they do is paint farms and barns. And he gave a tremendous price on the Patterson side of the farm, and the township shot it down.
Yes, Jeff, we've talked about that a number of times, right? And the difficulty that's been pointed out again this evening when the township owns the building and requirements that are in place. So I appreciate you sharing that, but the township as a public entity has certain requirements that a private landowner wouldn't have.
Okay.
Other comments? So the action step, if I can try to summarize, is Jennifer, you're going to take some of this back to Doug for us to revisit in the very near future when Dennis weighs in as to our next meeting, so that we can resolve all of this and come up with our final recommendations as a committee to give to the Board of Supervisors. Yes?
Right.
Okay, good. Any other questions on that? Because otherwise I'm going to move on. I see on the agenda that Dennis sent out, it's now other business, which is to notify the public that the comment period is to begin shortly. If I don't hear any objections, we will do that. So can we open it up to the public? I'm not sure who's doing that for us.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any public comment on the line?
There's no public comment online.
Jim, can you just confirm that the survey is open still?
Yes, it is. I had set a closing date on it about a month or two ago, and then I just extended that today so that if anyone would like to make comments, they can go to our Engage website, the Patterson Farm page at the bottom. People can share their thoughts and ideas on the Patterson Farm. If you have something that is more than 500 characters in length, you could also, on our website, go to our online permitting and citizens request portal. And in there, you could attach documents, photos, and put in your ideas so that we can take a look and disseminate them to all of the members of the ad hoc committee.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
No public comment at all? None?
Steve has his hand up.
Steve?
You're on mute, Steve. Steve, we can't hear you. Steve, I can read lips, but
I'm glad I put my hand up then.
We can hear you now, Steve.
Thank you. Since there's no public comment, let me go back and ask to revisit one of the discussion items that Joe brought up in his review. And in particular, having a 501c3 organization either be totally responsible or accept ownership in some way. Is there some consideration and some process that has been included with that information that Joe got about how the public continues to stay involved and continues to be part of the process with kind of maybe biannual reports or something like that to the public, or public meetings once a year to review the process, similar to the kind of access that turned out so well in the process that we've had so far. Joe?
So there's several different things. First of all, there's covenants that we could put in that would require review before any modifications over a certain dollar amount or design changes were made. And so, Steve, that could be the harbor or something like that would be able to do that. PHMC did say that in one of their agreements, they just have a yearly review and inspection of the site. So there's guidelines there's design guidelines that they're supposed to follow, and PHMC just does an inspection to make sure those design guidelines. So they're not asking, the site's not asking for permission or review, but they're actually just getting inspected on an annual basis to make sure that's in place. There's both models.
I'm sorry, Steve, I didn't understand that.
Well, I was wondering if we can some way, as we're going through the process of establishing this organization that's going to take over, that there be some kind of public review, public input that would not just be the supervisors saying, okay, have you satisfied our caveats, our requirements, and then making it obvious that we are continuing to accept input from the public, review from the public about how well we're doing. As a public entity,
right,
the ad hoc committee's done that to some extent, and certainly by having the public reviews and public meetings about the process, we have encouraged that kind of participation. And I'm trying to make sure that we don't lose that level of participation.
I mean, you're right, Steve. I mean, in general, when it came to public engagement, most of the discussion was around the programmatic aspects of how many people came to events, how many people attended the workshops or house tours or things like that. But you're asking a different question. You're asking, for, if you would, the public to act as a feedback mechanism in terms of how it's doing. And I'm sure that could be built in, but I didn't ask that question specifically.
Any other questions?
Joe, was that, did you need to come back to something, or was that the NHR?
So there was
Oh.
an action item, and Suzanne just touched on this, right? I said that I think it's worthwhile for us to investigate different ownership models. One being that the township owns the buildings, the township leases the buildings, and the third is that the township actually gives the buildings to the nonprofit with covenants and a reverter clause to make sure that it's being used, its intended use. I don't have necessarily the expertise in that. Is there someone who could maybe help me kind of think through that and come back to make a recommendation as to what's the appropriate way? What's the appropriate ownership model?
Jennifer, do you have any input on that?
Sorry to interrupt you guys. We do have 2 callers for public comment. If
Okay.
you want to address that.
Well, let's answer Joe's question first, and then we can take the public comment, please.
I'm sorry,
Sounds
would you,
good.
I got mixed up and I was muted. Would you just repeat that, please?
Yeah, I'm looking to put together just the advantages and disadvantages to the township owning the buildings, the township leasing the buildings, and the township giving the buildings to the nonprofit with the appropriate covenants and reverter clause in place to make sure that it's being used in the way intended. As Suzanne just talked about, I mean, when Jeff brought up this idea of this painter coming in, and Suzanne said, well, because, there's a certain process that the township needs to go through because it's a municipality that a nonprofit wouldn't need to go through, right? So I'm wondering, is there someone who could help us to understand, these 3 models and what would be advantages and disadvantages to each?
I was going
First-
to, sorry, I was going to suggest that maybe Jim Majewski would be someone to kind of put together a summary of that kind of information, or actually go to his boss, the township manager, and, see what he has to say about it.
Thank you for your suggestion, Steve. We are always looking forward for you to assign work to township employees. I think what Joe is asking for is there bandwidth amongst the volunteers to kind of put together a pro and con of the different models
I try to see if there's
on a high level.
Yeah. I was looking more for, is there expertise there? I mean, Jim might be the only person. I thought Jim might have a background in that. It's probably a land use lawyer, for example.
Yeah, Jim is not an attorney. He's many.
No, I don't mean
great
Jim
things.
Scott. I'm sorry, I meant Jim Scott. So,
Oh.
yeah.
That's what I was going to suggest. I would like to know what the legal differences are for, procurement and management.
Yeah, right.
Well, if Jim's absent, then it's always good to volunteer him. That's fair game.
I think so.
Maybe we can follow up with him afterwards.
Are we ready to move on to the public comment
I
period?
think so.
Who do we have on the line? And can I ask you to
So
give
we
your
have 2 of
name
them.
and where
I
you
will bring
live?
them in right now.
Thank
Pardon?
you. 2
Okay.
people, Ron.
Okay, 2. Can we allow the first person in, and can I ask them to state their name and their address, please?
Laura, you're live with the board. Please state your name and address.
Yes. Hi, Laura Tarantino, 185 Durham Road, Newtown. Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. My quick question is just a clarification on the corn crib. In the past, I think I recall Joe saying from a historical perspective, keeping that as an asset, as a structure on the farm. But somewhere along the line, what I'm hearing is people talking about dismantling it. So when did that happen? Is that a definite? Because I understand this, it's not a useful structure, but historically it has and serves a marker for the history. At what point is that decided? To keep it, to preserve it, to restore it, to find an alternate use for it, but have it remain as part of the original 15 structures of the farm?
Lori, I'll take a run at that and ask other committee members to jump in, but the process that we were going to follow tonight that Dennis had outlined in his email that he sent to us was tonight was a night for the committee and others to discuss these various options, discuss how we've each of us have weighed in on expenditures to certain things, but we were not making final decisions this evening. That final decision.
No, I understand that. It's
Okay.
just that the question did come up tonight. I mean,
Yes,
the
it did.
information was revealed about removing it. And that just was, a development to me. But
So, Laura,
I just wondered if that,
I think what you heard was that one person had an opinion that was a way to go, but no decisions have been made tonight.
Right.
okay. So, and just correct me, is that a point of interest that it remains as a structure historically, even if it is antiquated, et cetera? So that would, okay, that's all I needed. I just wanted to clarify that I had missed something in that process, that it was being taken off the boards, even with the list. When you post that list up, which I think is, I'll look at individually, but you can't really see it from, as an onlooker. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for clarifying. Good night.
Have a
Thank you,
great
Lori.
night.
Who's the second person calling in? Can I have the name and address, please?
I think it's Donna.
Hi, this is Donna.
Hi, Donna.
Hi, I just wanted to comment. It's Donna Doan, 2814 Langhorne Yardley Road, Langhorne. Just wanted to comment. I don't know if some of the committee members are aware, but Patterson Farm Preservation submitted a lease on Satterthwaite House through our attorney this week. So that is an option that's on the table. We're very interested to get into the property and work on the restoration. And from what I'm seeing at I really can't read the prices because it's a bit blurry on the screen. So I hope that information will be posted on the township website. But it seems like some astronomical sums are being considered there. And I think a 501c3 can really come in and have a tax dollar savings effect on this whole project that the taxpayers will appreciate. We have a lot of mentors. I know that Joe did a lot of work with his research, which was excellent. But I've also been talking to Bolton Mansion, which Jennifer is aware of. That house was actually on fire and it's been brought back and it's looking beautiful now. We have Craven Hall and William Tennant House. Moland House was a wreck and now it's beautiful. So that is testament to what can be done by a 501c3. So I hope that the committee will consider us. I don't know why there's no discussion of Patterson Farm Preservation. It always seems like we want to form a new 501c3, but we are here. We have been here since 2015. We stand ready to partner with the township to get this done and to make Patterson have a sustainable future, one that includes agriculture. It is not just the farming of the land that's important. It is the buildings. I have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Stedman when he says that there's no agricultural use. There is. What I would like to see done with the farm is the promotion of agriculture in our community. There's never been outreach from the township to the Secretary of Agriculture or any of the agricultural leaders in the community that could bring in programs such as the Master Gardeners or 4-H or Grange or the Bucks County Farm Bureau. We could tie in with the Pennsylvania Farm Show, the theme of which is connecting people this year to the land. We could have Russell Redding, the Secretary of Agriculture, come in and do some kind of personal appearance on the farm to raise the profile of the farm. This would bring in some of the high dollar donors, give Patterson Farm the recognition it needs throughout the Commonwealth, bring in the Quakers from the Philadelphia yearly meeting, make them aware that Satterthwaite is being restored, work with Bucks Beautiful or the Martha Washington Garden Club for the grounds. We could work with the Moravian Tile Works, all these kinds of things. Everything from $1 donations to $250,000 donations would come if the public was aware that we are supporting agriculture. There's an excellent book called Saving Farmland about how Madrona Farm was saved in Canada. And they literally took every donation and they grew and grew and grew. So this is certainly a possibility. And today is National Farmers Day. So I would like you to consider that when you make your recommendations and as you go through this thought process. We really need to support farming. We're probably going to lose a couple of more farms. We know for sure we're losing Torbert Farm. Any other farm that's in the township that is not under preservation could be imminently gone. So it's likely that the Ruth Wright's farm and the Patterson farm will be the largest remaining parcels in the township. So we don't want to dismiss that and say that these buildings has no agricultural purpose, because they do. All right, thank you very much. Good night, all.
Donna, thank you very much. I can tell you that in all the meetings I've attended with the Ad Hoc Property Committee, we really support that notion of advancing agriculture in the community. And there's a lot of good ideas that you have just advanced. But I do need to ask you about, because I don't know that any of the committee members are aware of the fact that you have submitted a lease on the Satterthwaite farm this week. I think that's new news.
Just to be clear, Don, I can help you with this one. They literally sent in a lease requesting that they be allowed to lease the building.
The farmstead, right.
Mm-hmm.
We modeled the lease, and I don't have the email addresses of the members of the committee, but you can email me at admin@pattersonfarmpreservation.org, and I can send you a copy of the lease if you're interested to see it. Our attorney modeled it on the lease that was provided to the AOY, so there's a similarity there. But you can read it over. We certainly are open to discussions and would look forward to that. Thank you.
And may I ask, Donna, that if you would, because I know that you and Dennis have communicated on various occasions, would you kindly send that to Dennis this evening so we can start to look at that, please?
I did send it to Dennis the other day, and I believe Jeff has it also.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other public comment?
There's no public comment on the line.
Any other comments by committee members?
Brian, I just want to clarify one point.
Good job.
In terms of the study that I did, it wasn't always starting a new 501c3. Sometimes it was selecting a 501c3, especially when it came to the way that PHMC thought about their property. So in the report, I put down some selection criteria for what would make a good candidate. And whether that's a new PHM, a new one coming in, or an existing one, but I think we should probably start to just spell out what that selection criteria is, and then I guess we'll have to go through a process of looking at existing ones or people who want to start one.
Thank you, Joe. I think we should capture that in the minutes, Bet, that last comment particularly. Any other comments by committee members? And nothing else from the public? No other public comment? Bet, you usually summarize any follow-up assignments. Do you want to summarize next steps here?
Bet, you're on mute.
Hi, Bet, you still with us?
Hello. Follow-up is that Joe Camerata has permission to go to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation to update the National Historic Registry application. Got that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. And we talked about finding the needs to be explored was the best kind of a comparison of ownership models.
Yes.
And I'll take a look at, we'll all need to take a look at your report in terms of considerations for existing 501c3s or new ones or whatever, but we'll take a look at that. Jennifer has already issued an email to Doug to clarify some pricing in terms of groundhogs and water.
Thank you, Jennifer.
She's already done it. So that's been done. And Donna had already sent the lease to Dennis, so we have that, I'm sure. there anything else I missed in terms of follow-up?
Any other comments to that? Hearing none, I can't schedule a future meeting. I think we'll wait for Dennis to get that meeting. My guess is he's going to do it real quick, because once we get this back, we can reconvene and then make some final decisions. So I guess we need a motion to adjourn, but before we do that, I will tell you that the score is 0-0 at the current time. But I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by Bet. All those in favor? Thank you all for coming tonight. Great meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Have a good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Go Phillies.
Go Phillies.